Carson Kvapil is expected to return to junior motorsports in 2026 despite signing the development deal with Team Penske, and Trackhouse Racing could in the future join up with Honda. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show those really quickly. We've only got one paint scheme to take a look at, and it's Carson Motorsports' 2025 Moto Casino scheme that we'll see later this year. I really like the look of this car. It's really cool to see a casino brand in the sport. I think Spire Motorsports, they've had a lot of nice looking paint schemes. This one's no exception. They did a very solid job on this, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack in 2025. I think it looks solid, and I definitely think it looks really, really good, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing. Now, RFK Racing, of course, won the pole for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Richmond, with Ryan Preece getting his second career NASCAR Cup Series pole. This is the first pole for RFK Racing since Texas in 2022 in the fall when Brad Keselowski won the pole for that event. This also is the first pole for the number 60 car in NASCAR Cup competition since Daytona in 2006 when Boris Said won the pole when he drove the 60 car when Frank Stoddard was the owner of that team, and Boris was part of that as well. This is definitely really shocking to see. It's the first pole in a long time for the 60 car, but it's not surprising to see RFK Racing win another pole. They've had a lot of speed this year. They just haven't been able to get the pole this year, but it was really impressive to see them get another pole. Congratulations to Ryan Preece on winning the pole. He was really solid and really, really good this year, and I think that he's had an opportunity. Of course, he has to win at Daytona to get in the playoffs, but I think it was pretty impressive to see him go out there and get it done and win the pole for the event. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the number 3. As reported by the NASCAR Insights account last night, that Austin Dillon led over 100 laps in the NASCAR Cup Series race en route to his second straight victory at Richmond Raceway. This is the first time that we have seen the number 3 lead over 100 laps in an event since the 1998 Daytona 500 when Dale Earnhardt finally won his first ever Daytona 500 in his 20th try. That is absolutely wild. It has been nearly 30 years since they accomplished that feat. Of course, Austin Dillon put up a dominating performance. Last year, he had a really strong car, but he didn't lead over 100 laps. And of course, his win was extremely controversial. But for him to legitimately do that and lead over 100 laps, I think is extremely impressive for Austin Dillon. Maybe the most impressive win he's had in his NASCAR Cup Series career at this point. Congrats to Austin Dillon on that front, leading over 100 laps. I think that's really impressive stuff, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about William Byron. With William Byron being over 60 points ahead of Chase Elliott in the regular season and Chase Elliott having problems, he is your 2025 NASCAR Cup Series regular season champion. William Byron has been one of the most consistent guys so far in 2025, has scored a lot of stage points, had a lot of really strong runs, and while they did flounder a little bit in the summer, they did what they had to do, had some really strong runs at Watkins Glen, ran decently at Richmond despite the damage, and got some stage points. And with Chase Elliott crashing out and no one else being close enough, William Byron is able to get it done. And some people want to see the playoff format continue to be the same thing and not most deserving guys winning it. But at least for Byron, the consistency plays off. He'll get 15 extra playoff points. Congrats to Byron on winning the regular season title. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Cookout 400. As it was announced last night that the Cookout 400 at Richmond Raceway officially sold out. This is the first time I believe that a race at Richmond has sold out in the NASCAR Cup Series since 2008. It has been nearly 20 years since that happened. And I think this is proof that going down to one race per year at a track makes a lot of sense because a lot of tracks that have gone down to one race like Michigan, like Pocono, their attendance has gone up. And we'll talk about that story here near the end of this episode. But I think that we should see less of tracks with 2 dates because the attendance matters a lot. I think that's something that I would love to see going forward in the future because I think that's something that I think is going to be important down the road as well. So I think that's a really huge deal. Pretty awesome to see them be able to go ahead and get that done. And I think it's nonetheless really good to see that the Cookout 400 sold out. Really awesome stuff. Really great stuff to see in general. And I'm glad to see that the Cookout 400 sold out for this year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR 25. As the soundtrack has been officially revealed for NASCAR 25, which will come out in about a month and a half from now. Among those is System of a Down, Royal Blood, Breaking Benjamin, Molly Hatchet with the iconic song Flirting with Disaster. Breaking Benjamin's new big song Awaken is on there. Royal Blood Out of the Black. System of a Down with Hypnotize, a pretty underrated song. Cadillac 3 with Party Like You. Some are wondering if the Luke Combs song was going to be in there, new Back in the Saddle song that is not in the game, unfortunately. But I think there's a lot of really solid sounds. And also, Chevelle with the clincher is in there as well. And a song that I think is actually really underrated as well. I think it's a very solid soundtrack, all things considered. It's not perfect, but you got to remember licensing is very, very important with these games. Not only you have to go through the record companies and the artists, but you also have to go through the publisher as well of these songs. So while it's not a perfect group, I think it's not a perfect soundtrack. I think it's a decent soundtrack, all things considered. Some unknown artists that are going to get the chance and opportunity to get known in here. So I think that's something to definitely look forward to for sure. I think it's a solid soundtrack. Is it perfect? No, but I think it's a solid soundtrack, and I'm looking forward to hear that in NASCAR 25 coming out soon. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the ARCA race from Springfield. Now, earlier today, you had the ARCA race that took place at Springfield after the NASCAR Cup Series race took place last night in Richmond. You have a lot of really big names that were out there because a lot of Cup guys were off yesterday. The guy who dominated early would be Brendan Butterbean Queen. He would lead the first few laps, but eventually Brent Cruz got by him early in the event, and he would take off. Unfortunately, a lot of incidents took place. Isabel Robusto, she crashed early in the race, but after issues for Brendan Butterbean Queen late in the event, Brent Cruz pulled out to a really solid lead and would come off the corner and win, I believe, his third or fourth ARCA race of 2025. This is redemption from last week at Watkins Glen, where he dominated the race at Watkins Glen, but unfortunately, they had the issues, got caught up in an electrical issue that cost him a shot at winning the ARCA event, which led to the Tristan McKee winning his first ever ARCA event at just 15 years old. I think Brent Cruz is really talented. Obviously, there's a lot of rumors and speculation that he's going to move up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series or the Craftsman Truck Series next year at this point. I think that he has a really good chance and opportunity to be very, very solid if he does move up next year, and I think he did a really good job in this race. A great dirt racer, been really solid, really, really strong. Nonetheless, really good to see him get it done. Congrats to him on a really strong performance in winning the ARCA race at Springfield. A well-deserved and well-earned win for him to get that done, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Williams. As it was announced on Friday afternoon that Josh Williams has found a ride for a couple races in 2025. He'll be joining Alpha Prime Racing for 4 NASCAR Xfinity Series races in 2025, driving a number 45 car. His first race will be at Daytona this weekend, then a run at the Charlotte Roval, then he's going to run at Las Vegas, and then a run the season finale at Phoenix as well. We all know, of course, that he left Kaulig Racing, got let go from Kaulig Racing about a month or so ago. We've been seeing Cup guys get behind a wheel like Carson Kvapil, Justin Haley, who will drive that car this weekend at Daytona, and Michael McDowell, who drove at Watkins Glen, and other drivers like Will Brown will drive next week at Portland as well. I'm glad to see Josh find a ride. I'm glad that a team like Alpha Prime is giving a chance and opportunity because I think that Josh Williams, it really wasn't working out of Kaulig. I would really love to see him be able to work it out with Kaulig. It just never really was coming together, and it wasn't working out with that program. So finding a new place to go to, like let's say this team, I think that's a really good opportunity for Josh. I think he's going to be able to perform pretty solidly. He's a decent super speedway racer too, so I think it could lead them having a really strong and really good run. I think he's going to have a good opportunity to be pretty competitive. Alpha Prime, they've had a solid super speedway program in the past as well. I think he's going to be solid, and I'm glad to see he found a rise. I really was hoping that Josh would get the chance and opportunity to be sticking around in Xfinity Garage and be sticking around in the sport. Glad he was able to find that seat and will drive for Alpha Prime. I think it's a good team to work with for at least a few races in 2025, and this also could be a potential landing spot for him on a full-time basis next year as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson and David Gravel. Now, Bob Pockers asked Kyle Larson's questions about the dirt silly season that took place this past week. We all know that Donnie Schatz was shockingly fired from Tony Stewart Racing this past week, and Donnie Schatz has joined up with Big Games Motorsports. Now, David Gravel is a teammate to Donnie Schatz for at least a couple races, and David Gravel and Kyle Larson, we know in recent weeks, have formed a pretty big rivalry that stemmed from what happened, I believe, at Knoxville not too long ago, and also, I believe, at Eldora as well, where they both got into some tension and beef throughout the last couple races in the dirt world. Now, Kyle Larson did say, people were saying, do you have to hate Donnie Schatz now because him being involved with David Gravel? Well, Kyle Larson pretty much came out and said that he doesn't hate David Gravel. He likes trash talking David Gravel, but he doesn't hate David Gravel. We know these are two of the best dirt guys in the world, but I think it's clear as day that you probably have a new heel that has happened in the dirt world because David Gravel is someone that a lot of people do not like because you went after one of the top dogs in the sport of dirt, and then of course is Kyle Larson. He isn't even full-time in dirt racing at this point, but he's been throwing gestures. Sammy Swindell went after him, I think, at Knoxville like 2 weeks ago, I'm pretty sure, and now you've got other people who have been coming in and clowning on David Gravel because some of the things that David Gravel's done, he's made some questionable moves. He basically just wrecked Kyle Larson for no reason whatsoever a couple weeks back. I think that's where the beef came from at that point because you didn't need to run into Kyle Larson and he just ran at him. He pulled a slider on you. I don't think it was over-aggressive. But I'm glad to see there's no real tension. Well, there's tension between these guys. But again, I don't think Kyle Larson truly hates him. They're just racing hard. They race hard. They're two of the best in their respective sport. I really don't think there's any true issues against them. Yeah, they probably don't like each other at points, but Larson doesn't hate him. He doesn't have anything personal against him. And I just think that they're both hard racing drivers who want to race as hard as possible to get up front and contend. But it's interesting stuff for sure on that front to see that he's going to be having to work with Donnie Schatz as well, that being David Gravel. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, I referenced this story a little bit ago, but of course the Cookout 400 from Richmond Raceway sold out for the first time since 2008. And there's a lot of people talking about the future, maybe a lot of tracks having only one event going forward. And one of those people who is actually in support of this is Kyle Busch. In fact, Kyle Busch says that most tracks, if not all, should have one day going forward. He even said his home track of Las Vegas Motor Speedway, a track that does put on some really good and solid racing in the next-gen era with the car on the mile and a half. Kyle Busch said that that track also should only have one day and it shouldn't have 2 dates going forward. I actually agree with Kyle Busch for the most part. I think tracks like Daytona, for example, though I will say with the next-gen card, hasn't raced really well. I think Talladega, though I think down the road that track could lose one day in the not-so-distant future. But I think majority of tracks in particular should not have 2 dates. Look, I love Kansas Speedway, and Kansas is a fantastic racetrack, but I think that Kansas in the future will lose one date. They only have a contract to host 2 dates, I believe, through 2026, so next year will be the last year on that. I would not be surprised if they sign an extension to continue going, but I think they're going to eventually go down to 1 date in the future because, well, and attendance has been a big issue. I think that you need a lot of tracks only hosting 1 day. It makes that event a lot bigger, and it really helps the series grow in a big way as well because the seats are really, really filled up generally for a lot of these tracks, and I think it's because they've been making moves like this. I think it makes sense to downsize tracks from having 2 days to 1 day in the future. I think that's something that is going to happen a lot more consistently in the future. I think it's something that needs to happen in the future, and I think going down to 1 day will be something to keep your eyes out on for sure because I think that's something that's going to be happening a lot more in the motorsports world. I think tracks like that, like I mentioned, are probably going to lose dates very, very soon. They have 2 dates at this point, and I think we'll see some downsizing happen and some restructuring as some of these dates at some of these tracks going forward into the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daniel Suarez and Tyler Reddick. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race last night at Richmond or a couple nights ago when you're watching this video, you saw a little bit of the tension between Daniel Suarez and Tyler Reddick. So, in the middle portion of the race, we had Tyler Reddick who had one of the strongest cars in the field. 2311 Racing were the dominant cars early in the race. Bubba Wallace led 123 laps in the race, and Tyler Reddick had won stage number 1 and led 45 laps of the event. Well, there was contact between Daniel Suarez and Tyler Reddick. Well, really, there was contact between Ty Gibbs and Tyler Reddick, but the reason that Ty Gibbs got into Tyler Reddick was because Daniel Suarez is being way too over-aggressive, got way too aggressive and way too impatient on new refresher tires, just ran in the back of Ty Gibbs multiple times at that point and forced Ty Gibbs up into Tyler Reddick, spinning him out. Now, Tyler Reddick was not happy with Daniel Suarez after he found out what happened exactly. He basically ran into Daniel Suarez going down the straightaway a little bit, and then going up into turn number 1, he forced Daniel Suarez wide up the racetrack, and Suarez would lose a ton of positions. I think Daniel Suarez did take responsibility for the incident that happened on the racetrack, but being interviewed by many reporters in the industry, you could tell that Tyler Reddick was really upset. Now, there's a couple reasons why Tyler Reddick's frustrated, because number 1, he is going into Daytona only being 89 points up. Now, on points, he's going to make the playoffs at this point, but he's got to be worried about the fact that someone below the cutoff line, like Kyle Busch, who is Austin Dillon's teammate, like someone like a Ryan Preece or Chris Busch or Brad Gzowski, have been really good at super speedways. Well, Ryan Preece race, not as good at Daytona, with a lot of flips he's had. But I think that there is a chance that you could see both Reddick and Bowman be in a lot of trouble of making it. And I think there's a lot of pressure on that as well. But I also understand Tyler Reddick's frustration because I really don't understand what Daniel Suarez was doing. He wasn't the only one. I didn't understand what Kyle Busch was doing there at Richmond when he got into multiple cars and caused a couple big incidents. I just didn't understand some of the driving etiquette and some of the driving standards out there by some of the drivers, and Suarez is one of them. Look, I think Suarez is talented. Obviously, I know where he's going to be going for the remainder of the 2020, well, for this year, same with Trackhouse, but of course, we don't know where he's going yet for 2026 at this point. So I think some of the driving standards he pulled there were unacceptable from Suarez's part. I think it was unacceptable and kind of stupid that he took Tyler Reddick out of contention. I think that was way over aggressive and way overkill from Daniel Suarez on the racetrack, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, earlier this week, we saw someone in the industry, that being Kyle Petty, of course, is a former driver in the sport and a former car owner as well, and was part of NBC for many, many years. Not sure if he is still a part of NBC at this point, but we saw Kyle Petty draw a lot of ire because he was basically defending the next-gen car in a really big way, saying that the car we have, it is what it is. It's not a stock car anymore, and we need to be getting used to the kind of racing we saw on the racetrack. Now, before the Cup Series race took place, Denny Hamlin spoke about some of the comments as well, and he basically spoke on what Kyle Petty said. He says Kyle Petty is partially right about us having some great races, but what Denny Hamlin also said is that a lot of those really good races happened in the early era of the next-gen era, and racing was better in the early portion because nobody had figured it out. He mentioned the fact that everyone has figured out this next-gen car, including all the top teams like Hendrick and Joe Gibbs Racing, and that's why the racing has suffered. I think Denny Hamlin is absolutely correct about this. I think one of the things you have to look at, and going back to previous generations of cars, is that after a couple years, NASCAR would change a car up. Look at the difference of the Gen 4 car when it started in 1992 to the end of its era in 2007. There were changes made to the car almost every other year. Go to the Gen 5 car, the car of tomorrow. They had the wing on the back of the car in 2007. By 2011 and 2012, you had the spoiler on the back of the car. The splitter wasn't there as much and frequently as it been with the older style car. And the racing got better. The Gen 6 car started off horrendously in 2013. The car looked completely different by the fourth year. We need to see changes to the next-gen car, and we really have seen very minimal changes to this car. There is, of course, a lot of talk about adding horsepower to the next-gen car, and I think that would help a little bit for sure, but I really don't think it would help enough. There's a lot of other fundamental flaws that this car really has that I think need to be fixed at this point. But Denny Hamlin, I think, is mostly right about this. I think that there are major changes that are going to be needed to make to the next-gen car to make it better. Hopefully, we can see those changes soon. So I think the racing I really would love to see it get better, and I think it needs to get better going forward for the sport, I think, to survive long term, because I think the racing has been lackluster at times, in my honest opinion, with the next-gen car. We had a good race last night at Richmond. Does excuse for some of the racing being not as strong as it's been in the past, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Fox Sports. Now, I kind of touched about Fox Sports coverage from the ARCA race, and I talked about the coverage from the truck race and a little bit of glimpse of it during my Truck Series race review. But there has been a lot of talk about the truck coverage so far in 2025. And I think they've had a lot of bad races when it comes to their coverage so far this year. However, I think that this truck broadcast from Richmond Raceway may have been one of the worst, if not the worst broadcast I think I've seen as a racing fan, maybe ever or in quite some time. They missed wrecks throughout the night. Of course, they weren't even at the racetrack, which is something I've had a big problem with. I don't know why Fox has continued to do this. It really doesn't make sense to me. We've been seeing this in a lot of sports, not just with NASCAR and racing, but we've seen it with like the NBA, college sports, and all that. And I just simply don't understand why we're doing all these remote booths. It just takes the fundamentals out of sports broadcasting in general. And I think having remote booths is a terrible decision. I don't like it when the CW does it either. So it's not just exclusive to Fox. I don't like it when the CW does it. They're probably going to do it for Portland. I'll come a little bit slack for that race, but I'm not a fan of them doing the remote broadcast overall. And then there's no chemistry in the booth. Jamie Little is terrible in the booth as a lead commentator. She's an amazing pit reporter. That's where I think she should be. She should not be being the lead commentator. So she doesn't command the respect of people in the booth. And Michael Waltrip should have been gone a long time ago. And Regan Smith's fine, but he is not great in the booth. There's just no chemistry in the booth. The truck coverage has been atrocious. It's been abysmal for quite some time. And there are desperate changes that are needing to be made for Fox Sports going forward if I think the network is going to survive having coverage. There has been rumors out there about the truck coverage being sold to another network. I would would absolutely love that at this point to get it off the Fox, and I really think Fox should not be covering NASCAR at this point. If they want to keep the Cup Series, that's fine, but they don't really care. That's the frustrating thing for me. The coverage has been very lackluster. It's been very abysmal for quite some time, and there are major and desperate changes that need to be made for Fox to get better at this point, and I really don't see those changes being made, and I think there has to be massive changes coming soon, because I think Vince Moscar did a great video on this talking about the truck coverage in recent years. I think it was terrible and horrendous this week, and it was not acceptable coverage for Fox, in my opinion, to see it as bad as it's been for quite some time. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Dillon. Now, we already talked about the fact that Austin Dillon won the NASCAR Cup Series race at Richmond Raceway, but there's been a lot of talk around Richard Childress Racing in general over the course of the last couple of weeks, and really for the last couple of years as well, about the lack of speed that they've had generally throughout the last couple of years, and them struggling, falling behind teams like Hendrick in the Trackhouse Racing and Spire in the Chevrolet camp. Well, Austin Dillon kind of spoke about the direction of Richard Childress Racing going forward, and apparently he and his grandpa Richard have had a lot of arguments in regards to the direction of Richard Childress going forward in the organization itself. And Austin Dillon has asked for a lot of changes, and eventually after a while, Richard isn't as difficult to basically get through, and eventually he caves into some of the changes that are needed to be made. I have said this for quite some time, and I know people are going to kind of question me saying this even after he won the race. I've said this for a while that Austin Dillon down the road should retire from being a race car driver and become an executive over at Richard Childress Racing. Hear me out. Look what happened to RFK Racing. For a long time, Jack Roush ran the ship, and the program was fading. They got someone younger, like Brad Keselowski, who came in 2022, not even 40 years old at that point. And look at RFK. They've had 3 competitive cars. They've been a 3-car team, and all 3 cars have had chances to win races. I think, say what you want to say about Austin Dillon as a driver, he is a guy who knows how to get things done. In fact, he is a major part of why Kyle Busch in the first place is over at Richard Childress Racing. So I absolutely think that if Austin Dillon was to retire in the future, which I think is going to happen in the not so distant future at this point, I think he could absolutely do a really good job being executive and having a management company. He runs a bull riding company, and there's been a lot of things that I've seen, a lot of success we have seen from Austin Dillon and other things at this point. So I would definitely love to see him down the road kind of go into the retirement side of things, but I think he could become someone who could really get RCR back in shape. Could it be as good as Brad? I'm not sure, but I think he actually could do a really solid job being a leader of this team, be executive, and take an executive approach to the team. So I think he could help the organization get back to their winning ways and be where they were. I think he should retire in the next couple of years. He's going to be in that 3-car next year, but I think 2027 or 26 could be the last year. We'll see what happens going forward into the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Nice Motorsports. Now, we talk about this team on the channel on early Friday, but Nice Motorsports had a pretty massive and major announcement, as it was announced that Josh Harris and Greg Fowler have become the majority owners of Nice Motorsports and will be taking over most of ownership from Al Nice. Josh Harris owns one of the top sponsors from the organization, that, of course, I believe being DQS Solutions, I'm pretty sure, which has been a major sponsor for Nice Motorsports, and Greg Fowler owns the management company, or owns the sponsorship that Matt Mills has had over the course of the last couple of years, that being JF Electric. Now, some other things that were announced as well. Cody Efa has been promoted to president and CEO of the organization, and Phil Gold has been promoted to competition director. He will still be the crew chief for the number 45 truck for the remainder of this year, and I'd also expect that he'll be the crew chief for 2026 as well, with who's driving to 45, which could be like a Connor Jones or someone else at this point. There's also been some questions about the team and how many trucks they are going to run in 2026. They are likely going to have at least 3 full-time trucks next year. There is a chance, however, they could have 4 full-time trucks. There's been a lot of talk about that. They did confirm in the press conference as well that they're not planning to have 5 trucks for next season. They also did confirm as well that Al Nice will still be part of the program in some way, shape, or form. He just won't have a majority role of the team. It will be taking more of a step back with him getting a little bit older and younger people coming in. They'll be taking more of the hands-on approach, and he'll have more of a hands-off approach going forward. They also noted, despite the rumors about them switching over to Dodge, and people thought they were going to be switching over to Ram. That's what they thought the announcement was going to be. They will be staying with Chevrolet for the 2026 season, which isn't shocking and surprising. They kind of confirmed that like a month or so ago at this point, and now it's been officially confirmed. They even talked about maybe ceasing their operation and shutting down their truck operation, which would have been surprising, but I really didn't know where the direction of the organization was going to go. I'm really hoping that with Josh Harris and Greg Fowler coming in, they can get Nice Motorsports back on track. They lost one of their star drivers in Caden Honeycutt recently after they fired him from the team and organization, and I think that they needed some new guys coming in to really help the program get back up and running. I'm not sure if the guys that run sponsors who don't really run teams, who've never ran teams before, are going to do great. I expect Cody Efaw and Phil Gold to really help run the operation. I think Phil Gold is a fantastic crew chief. He's done a good job as a crew chief in recent years, and I really think this team has potential. Now, the big question is, what could the driver lineup be? There's been rumors about Connor Jones going over there, though they've denied it recently. Andres Perez, I think there's a chance he may be full-time with this program next year. Sounds like Ross is going to be back with the program, at least on a part-time stint next year, and I would also think maybe Bailey Curry could be full-time, though I'd also expect Matt Mills, who has a JF Electric sponsorship, to probably be sticking around with Nice Motorsports at least for a little bit going forward. So I think for Nice, it's an interesting move to say the least. Again, we thought it was going to be something bigger, maybe a driver announcement, but I expect some driver announcements for that team coming soon. So maybe some exciting stuff. Who knows at this point, but Nice Motorsports is making some really big changes going into next year. This is effective, I think, immediately as well, and they'll be looking to get that organization back on track and back in the running. We'll see what happens for Nice Motorsports going forward, and we'll see if the team can step up and get a little better going into the 2026 and maybe going forward into other seasons in the not-so-distant future as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mamba Smith. Now, if you were on Twitter earlier today, you probably saw the tweet that Mamba Smith was responding to. I think it was Torak34 on Twitter that basically talked about the championship format in some way, shape, or form. Well, Mamba responded to that, and this tweet got a lot of attention on social media earlier tonight. So Mamba Smith basically said that the championship is to not determine who is the best driver. It's to determine who is the best team all year long. That everyone stands up and basically it's the team that performs the best at the end of each season. When I saw this tweet from Mamba Smith, I was shocked. Because when I saw it, I'm like, are you kidding me, Mamba? What are you talking about? This is not the NFL. This is not the NHL, where the best teams go out there and win. This is NASCAR. This is motorsports. I think the goal of every championship, regardless of the format that we've had from the beginning, the goal is to determine who is the best driver every year. And then you have the best team every year. The main focus is the driver. That's why we've handed out a driver championship. This is not an owner's championship we're talking about. This is a driver's championship. And I get the owner's championship is really, really important to all the owners in the sport. But the main thing we determine is a driver championship. It's not who performs at the best at the end of the year. It's the best all year long. That's what we've been wanting for a long time, Mamba. That's what we've been trying to say for a long time. And God, I've said this for a bit, but there are some people in the media of NASCAR, not saying all. I'm talking about people like Mamba. I'm talking about people like Larry McReynolds, Dave Moody, Daniel Trotta with some of the comments they made on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. They will get mad if you criticize the playoff format. They'll defend the next-gen car like Kyle Petty has done and other people in the industry have defended. And I'm just tired of these people that are paid by NASCAR or working for NASCAR in other lanes, not criticizing the sport for things. To me, I've talked about the championship format for quite some time. There is no, again, I'm glad Shane Van Gisbergen got 4 wins. He probably shouldn't be in the playoffs, so he's in the top 25 in points. Austin Dillon, 25th in the points. One race should not erase all the bad season you've had. Austin Dillon has not had a good season. It's been better than last year because he did get a legitimate win, unlike last year. But I think when you look at this tweet, I could not fathom what Mamba Smith was talking about here. It doesn't make sense because we have always determined who is the best driver is the one who should win the championship every single year. I cannot believe that Mamba said this. Mamba, what are you doing? Like, this is not the way, man. You know better than this. And this is not the first tweet that Mamba has made on social media that just does not make sense. I can't fathom how someone can say something that just sounds clueless at this point. And Mamba, like I said, knows better, and he just made a terrible take. It was a terrible take from him, and I expect better from Mamba. I know he's a hype man for the sport, but Jesus Christ, I thought he'd do better when it comes to basically making a tweet like that. That was a terrible tweet from Mamba, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ty Dillon. Now, there has been talk and conversation about the future of Ty Dillon in the NASCAR Cup Series for 2026, as Ty Dillon has not signed a contract extension or a contract with an organization for the 2026 season. So what are the plans for Ty Dillon currently at the moment for next year? Well, this is something that kind of got touched on with the call rumors that we're going to be talking about here in just a short little bit. According to what was reported on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, it sounds like Ty Dillon is expected to return to Kaulig Racing full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026 and continue driving a number 10 car. And according to what Chris Rice said, speaking to people from Sirius on Thursday, the announcement is expected to be confirmed at some point in the coming weeks as well, potentially with a video and other things as well. We are expecting the Ty Dillon more than likely is going to sign not just a one-year extension with Kaulig Racing, but probably even a multi-year deal as well. There's been theories out there that maybe they're not going to announce him to be in the Cup Series full-time and maybe moving down to Xfinity Series or go down to the new truck program that's rumored at this point, and I don't think that is going to be the case. Look, Ty Dillon is starting to bring some sponsorship and funding into the team and organization. And Ty Dillon, say what you want to say, he's actually not been that bad. Coming into this year, I really thought Ty Dillon was going to get behind the wheel of that number 10 car and basically not be as good as Daniel Suarez was. But he's actually been pretty solid this year, and he's proven me wrong throughout the year so far on how well he has actually performed. He's shown some solid pace and really good speed at times, and I think he's done a pretty good job behind the wheel this year of that number 10 car, and he's had some decent runs, and he almost won the in-season tournament this year, which is one of the big reasons why DraftKings came on to sponsor Ty Dillon in the first place this season, because of him going out there and being extremely good in the in-season tournament, and he had a good stretch of races during that time. I think the hope, though, going into next year with this team is to get better. I think for Ty Dillon, the goal is to kind of run and start finishing in the top 15 and top 20 consistently more, and he's had some of those really good runs. There's no denying that at this point, but I think many of us are expecting Ty Dillon to continue getting better, and I think he has found a home with Kaulig Racing. He's had some decent speed this year with the Kaulig Racing team and organization, so it makes really a lot of sense for him to stick around with this team and program with how well he has been running so far this year. He's not been amazing by any stretch of imagination, but I think he's had some really good runs with the team and organization. So, like I said, he's going to be sticking around with the team going into 2026. Not shocking and surprising at this point. Again, I do expect that announcement to come here very soon, where he is going to sign not just a one-year extension, but I probably do think it's going to be a multi-year deal because of how well he's ran at times this year. I think he's earned the right opportunity to get at least a couple-year extension. Good to see that he'll be likely back with the team and organization in the 2026 NASCAR Cup season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kaulig Racing once again. We already talked about Ty Dillon expected to sign a contract extension with Kaulig, but let's talk about Kaulig and the rumored Ram program. So there's been a lot of talk and chatter over the course of the last couple of weeks that Kaulig Racing is very likely the number one team that could be switching over to the new Ram program in 2026. And Adam Stern noted as well that Kaulig Racing has acknowledged that they have spoken to Ram, and they say that every team has spoken to Ram about going over there in 2026, which is exactly true. Now, according to what was reported, chances are increasing for them to go over there in 2026. The big question is going to be around Kaulig Racing switching over to Ram next year. What does this mean for a couple things? Number one, will they eventually become the number one Dodge team? I think that is actually a really big possibility. I think one of the reasons why they're looking to go over to Dodge next year is to really get this program back up and running. Kaulig Racing has struggled in the NASCAR Cup Series, and their Xfinity program really has taken a back step as well in recent years. And I think going over to a manufacturer like this and switching over to Ram, which you don't have to spend as much money compared to having having a Cup Series program in the future, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think Kaulig is a team that really could use the boost in cash at this point, though they have Ty Norris that has come in. And I think that this team is really looking to make big moves at this point. So I think there's a very good chance you're going to see Kaulig go over there. Now, what could their driver lineup be? We're not sure at this point. There's been a lot of talk about a potential gong show coming in for that program. I think that's actually a major possibility at this point right now. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. Now, in the same article as well, which we'll talk about Trackhouse Racing in a little bit, there are some other teams that have been mentioned as possibilities for the Ram program. We talked about GMS Racing potentially being a team that could switch over to the Ram program and go over there in 2026. There was a lot of talk about that a couple months ago, according to Adam Stern. It sounds like those talks have stalled a little bit and they've kind of fizzled out. It's not out of the realm possibility that something like that could still happen in the future, but it seems like those chances are kind of decreasing at this moment. There's also been talk about Cletus McFarland going over to the Ram program and being involved in some way, shape, or form. Adam Stern does note that while it's not officially out of the running that Cletus should still go over to Dodge and Ram, it seems like that's not really what's kind of known at this point. It seems like that's kind of been dropped down a little bit on being a possibility. So they also mentioned ThorSport Racing, and I think ThorSport is a team that could go over there. ThorSport, in my opinion, from the get-go has been the team that made the most sense to switch over to the Ram program. It makes the most sense at this point because they are struggling in trucks. Yes, they have 2 trucks that made the playoffs this year, but they haven't won this season. And from what I understand, they're in their final year of their deal with Ford. They got that deal because of Haley Deegan going over there and being part of the program. So I think it makes the most sense for Kaulig and ThorSport Racing to be the 2 teams that go over to the Ram program. I would expect the lineups then to be very similar, like Ty Majeski, Matt Crafton, who I think is going to retire here in the not-so-distant future and move on to something else here soon. But I think that there are some big changes that are coming nonetheless, and I think that ThorSport, again, is one of the favorites, and also Kaulig Racing, I think, is another team that is absolutely a favorite to switch over to the Ram program in the future. So we'll see what happens in regards to this and see if Kaulig Racing truly does, in fact, end up going there. But I think it's very likely at this point that they are, in fact, going to switch over up there, and I think that's the move that will likely happen is Kaulig Racing. And I do mention, like the other team that I mentioned, that being, of course, ThorSport, I think they're in the running to make that move as well for 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about O'Reilly Auto Parts. Now, I did a video covering the story a little bit on the channel, but there's been a lot of talk about what the new title sponsor is going to be for the secondary series and what will replace the Xfinity series for next year. There was a lot of talk in the industry about Busch Beer potentially originally becoming the sponsor. Someone now mentioned as well, something that I had heard. Freeway Insurance was one of those sponsors that was talked about, also potentially becoming the new title sponsor for the Xfinity series. But it looks like we have our new title sponsor coming in for 2026 with an announcement sometime expected in the coming days as well, according to Jordan Bianchi. According to what was reported by Adam Stern, it looks like O'Reilly Auto Parts is in the pole position to become the entitlement sponsor of the Xfinity Series in 2026. And according to Jordan Bianchi, it is a multi-year deal. The announcement, like I already mentioned, is expected to come out sometime this week, probably maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. There's something that might be bigger than that we'll talk about here in just a short little bit when it comes to the schedule. But O'Reilly Auto Parts, of course, that association with NASCAR in the past. They, of course, have sponsored races in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in recent years, and they've had some association with teams and organizations and have been associate sponsors as well. Now, O'Reilly Auto Parts is a massive auto parts company. They have thousands of stores across the world, and they definitely have a lot of money in their pocket as well. We don't know the exact details on how long the deal is going to be. Again, the mentioned multi-year deal, that could range from being 2 years to 3 years to 5 years. One of my theories is that this is going to be throughout the whole media deal, so starting in 2026 and probably going through 2031 at this point, and then we'll probably renegotiate and figure out what comes in, which I think Busch Beer would absolutely be the one that makes the most sense at the point at that time. For those wondering about Xfinity, Xfinity is still sticking around in NASCAR. They're just going to become a premier partner in the NASCAR Cup Series. They backed out. A big reason why they backed out being a title sponsor for the Xfinity Series is because of Comcast no longer being involved in the secondary series, because, of course, NBC and Comcast are no longer covering it. They're only on the CW at this point, and the CW is not part of the Xfinity and Comcast brand. That's why the switch is going to be happening for next year at this point. And again, this makes the most sense. This makes some sense for sure. The big question I have, though, is what is the name going to be for 2026? Is it going to be called the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series? That doesn't really roll off the tongue too much. I think the thing that make the most sense is the NASCAR O'Reilly Series. O'Reilly's and all that. I think it'd make a lot of sense for the NASCAR O'Reilly series. Or could we have like an initial of the name? NOAPS. Could that be a possibility? I think there, because you think of Xfinity. Yes, Xfinity may not have been the best name ever, but Xfinity, that tag makes sense. The NASCAR Xfinity series, as fast as Xfinity Internet. I don't really think as fast as like delivery service is going to be the tagline that's really going to stick out for a lot of people. But I think it's good that O'Reilly Auto Parts is going to be bringing a lot of money, because that's the most important thing, is the money that O'Reilly Auto Parts is going to be bringing in to the NASCAR Xfinity Series or the O'Reilly Series going into next year. I think that's something to look forward to for sure. And you're going to have some driver changes that we'll probably be talking about here in just a little bit as well. But I think there's some big things in the works as well on that. Again, I'm very interested to see how long the deal exactly is going to be for O'Reilly Auto Parts. I think Jordan Bianchi kind of talked about it, and I'm going to be interested to see how much money in the deal they exactly are going to be making from this deal, because I think the secondary series will probably be making a ton of money at this point. We'll keep an update on this for sure, but this is a major, major deal, right, for O'Reilly's to become the new entitlement sponsor for the secondary series. I think it's a massive win for the sport in general, and I think it's big that you have a new entitlement sponsor coming in that does have association with the sport. Pretty exciting stuff, and good to see that we will see O'Reilly coming in and become the new entitlement sponsor starting in 2026, with announcement coming soon and other things that are in the works very soon as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the 2026 NASCAR schedule. As it was reported by Private Porno and Kelly Crandall as well, that the 2026 NASCAR schedule is expected to be released this week. In fact, it looks like the schedule will be coming at some point tomorrow. There's a lot of things that were noted from Kelly Crandall's article in regards to the 2026 schedule. Some things where I've known at this point, some things that we're finding out now. According to Kelly Crandall in the article on Friday, it looks like the first 5 NASCAR Cup Series races are going to remain the same. You're going to open up with Bowman Gray as well before the points paying races, but the Daytona 500 is going to open up the season. Then we'll race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Then we'll race at Circuit Americas, having a road course race early in the year. Then after that, we will race at Phoenix, I believe, and then after that, we'll be at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. According to her, Darlington Raceway is going to move a little bit earlier in the year than it was this year. Darlington was in April earlier this year. Now we've moved to March. So there will be 2 Darlington races in 2026, of course, with the Summer 500 being on Labor Day once again next year and opening up the playoffs. Darlington will be moved to March, kind of how it used to be many years, where they had the Rebel 400, Rebel 500 happen in March every year. It looks like also Richmond Raceway is going to be making some changes, as well as the Richmond Cup race. It will be moving from August this year all the way into May. Not exactly sure where to go. Maybe the week before the All-Star race is my guess at this point, being a lot closer to the Charlotte hub. That's my guess that Richmond will go probably in that middle weekend around May 5th, May 11th weekend. Who knows at this point? Another big change, Chicagoland is expected to be on the 2025 schedule as a replacement for the Chicago Street Course, and Mexico City as well. We know Mexico City will not be on the NASCAR schedule in 2026. Chicagoland is expected to replace him. We're kind of wondering what exactly the date was going to be. It's expected to be on July 4th weekend, which is where the Chicago Street Course date was in 2025, and it's been for the last couple of years. It will be on the Oval during the 4th of July weekend. Some are not the biggest fan of that from some of the paying attention, but I honestly am glad Chicago will be back on the NASCAR schedule in 2026. Moving on to next, let's talk about New Hampshire Motor Speedway. New Hampshire is expected to be moving back out of the playoffs in 2026 to an earlier day. That day has not been confirmed. I'd expect that probably to be in August, maybe before the playoffs take place, maybe going back to the July date it's had for quite some time. It won't be in the playoffs next year in 2026, which means there may be a big change for one of the races that's not in the playoffs that might be going in. Could we see Atlanta move in? That is certainly a possibility. Speaking of another track, Sonoma Raceway. Sonoma Raceway is expected to be moving up a couple weeks earlier in 2026. It's expected to move after the week of San Diego. San Diego is going to be on June 21st of this year on Father's Day. So it looks like you're going to probably the first race on this side of TNT will open up at Sonoma Raceway on June 28th. So big advantage to Shane Van Gisbergen on that front, of him being great at road course and him dominating this year. So that we'll have Sonoma after that. It won't move to the early portion of the year. There was talk about it maybe moving to the green side of the year like we've been all wanting for quite some time, but that will not be the case. Moving on to the next big thing, there's a lot of talk about Iowa Speedway currently at the moment right now, and some uncertainty around that. In that article, Kelly Crandall said there's been 50-50 on the track was going to come back or not. Jordan Bianchi did confirm on the teardown, and Jordan Bianchi is someone who I really trust. Not saying I don't trust Kelly Crandall. She's a great reporter, by the way. But when it comes to scheduling stuff, Jordan Bianchi is someone that I really trust at this point. And he said last night late on the teardown that Iowa Speedway is expected to be back on the NASCAR Cup schedule in 2026. He explained that a big reason for that is because what track is going to replace it going into the year, and I think that makes a lot of sense at this point. Look, I know the racing was not that great at Iowa Speedway earlier this year, basically for all the races at that point that took place there, but I think that Iowa Speedway, there's a massive market there. The big thing is, will they bring the temporary grandstands back, because they did not have the temporary grandstands for this year? I think that's a really big question at this point, what will happen there. And then the other big obvious one is what is happening with North Wilkesboro and Dover. Obviously, we've heard a lot of rumors as of now that Dover Motor Speedway will likely host the All-Star race in 2026. Not confirmed, but that's very likely at the moment right now. And North Wilkesboro is likely going to move into the date where Dover is, which is in the middle of July. So it'll probably be the second last race of the in-season tournament once again. So North Wilkesboro will get its first points paying date in 30 years. I think it's actually really cool. After 30 years of waiting to get a points paying day, that is going to be coming in 2026. But Dover is expected to go into the day of the All-Star event, which a lot of people, including myself, do not want to see Dover host the All-Star race currently at the moment. The racing is just not going to be good at this point, and it generally is going to blow when it comes for the racing product at that point. In general, it's going to be very interesting to see what exactly the schedule is going to look like for 2026, not just for the Cup side, but Xfinity and trucks. So there's been rumors that the Truck Series is going to go to Sonoma. There's some uncertainty around Watkins Glen and Lime Rock if that's going to be on the calendar for next year. There's some other changes that are going to be expected to be announced with other changes coming in, but we should be getting the 2026 schedule very soon, and that should be coming in the coming hours and coming days as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Trackhouse Racing. Now, I talked about the Kaulig side of things in regards to Dodge, because we all know Kaulig Racing is very likely going over to Dodge and Ram in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. But I was reading through the same article from Adam Serm, and he quoted the same thing from the article on Twitter. I believe it was yesterday or earlier today. And he knows that while some have wondered if Trackhouse will be a candidate for Dodge/Ram going forward into the future, they may actually wait for Honda to align with the same OEM that they have in MotoGP currently at the moment. This is an absolutely massive bombshell and a massive Adam Stern bomb, because they call Stern bombs. Because when I think about a new manufacturer coming in, a team that really could move over to a new manufacturer in the future, I think Trackhouse Racing would make the most sense for Dodge at this point, because I think that Trackhouse Racing is a team that wants to go bold. And Ram would like to have a team that's had a lot of success in NASCAR Cup competition. Think about this. Trackhouse Racing this year has had 5 wins in the NASCAR Cup Series, 4 of them with Shane Van Gisbergen and 1 with Ross Chastain. Now, Honda, there's been a lot of talk about that manufacturer. There's been rumors for many, many years about Honda potentially being a candidate to come to the NASCAR Cup Series in the future. And Honda, there's been increased talk that they could come to NASCAR in the next couple of years. After the rumors of Dodge and Ram came into play, we started seeing reports from people like Adam Stern. And we know currently at the moment that there is a lot of talk and a lot of rumors about the uncertain future of Honda in IndyCar currently at the moment. Their contract right now at this point is only through the 2026 season as one of the main engine suppliers and manufacturer suppliers for IndyCar currently at the moment. Now, some have said there is a good chance and possibility that they could potentially stick around for the 2027 season, because they have had the hybrids, and while I don't think they've been the most successful thing in IndyCar, probably made the racing a little bit worse at this point. They really like those hybrids and want them to stick around for a while, so that could convince them to stay in IndyCar. But let's say they leave IndyCar, they're of course going to put a lot of focus on the Formula One program, which Aston Martin is going to be very involved with that program starting next year. But I think that them going to NASCAR does make a lot of sense. Now, the earliest that we would see Honda come to NASCAR, probably at this point, is 2028. to be approved for a new body. I believe September 1st is the deadline every single year, and we're only about 2 weeks away from that point at this moment for that to happen. So I would have to think it would be at earliest 2028 for them to come in. You look at some of the contracts with Trackhouse Racing, I believe Ross Chastain is very heavily aligned with Chevrolet. He's been with Chevrolet pretty much his whole entire career at this point since he came into sport in 2011. Well, there was a time he, of course, drove for Brad Keselowski Racing in trucks, but then, of course, he went over to Chevrolet and has driven for them for a very long time. Now, Ross Chastain obviously has been with the organization will be with the organization if they don't switch to 2028. It would be 6 or 7 years he's been with Trackhouse Racing, but he's had a home for quite some time. So would he end up leaving to go to Honda? That'd be very interesting. I think Connor Zilisch and Shane Van Gisbergen are more linked to Trackhouse Racing than anything else. They're probably both going to stick around for the future, unless Connor Zilisch gets poached by another manufacturer and someone from Chevrolet, like let's say Hendrick Motorsports, for example. I think Hendrick is going to be very high in trying to get Connor Zilisch in the next couple of years, and it could happen as early as 2027, depending on what happens with Alex Bowman. But again, Trackhouse Racing potentially being the team that could go to Honda if they come in. That is a major, major deal. Because I think about this with Trackhouse. They're a team, like I said, that is very, very ambitious. And they always want to make bigger, badder, and crazier moves to get their organization exactly up to the top of the step and being a great organization in the sport. And if they come into NASCAR, that's a big deal because then you're going to have to be talking about hybrids. There's a lot of talk about multiple engine compartments coming into the sport in the future. NASCAR very likely in the next couple of years is going to adopt some sort of hybrid system, whether we like it or not. I don't entirely agree with it, but some sort of hybrid system is coming in the majority of cars that are going out at this point in the world of cars. So I would have to think that there'll be some sort of hybrid modernization thing that is going to come into play. But I will say with Trackhouse potentially switching to Honda, that could be a major deal. But then you may have BOP. Everyone knows what BOP is, balance of performance. Balance of performance could be something to watch out for, and that's something that I think may come into NASCAR in the future as well if it does get implemented, because I think they're going to want something like that to come into play. Remember, NASCAR owns IMSA. And I think they're going to want this. Now, things can absolutely change depending on what happens with the lawsuit going forward at this point. But I think there is definitely some big changes coming down the road with the Trackhouse side of things. And I think, again, Trackhouse being a team that could potentially go to a new manufacturer like Honda, for example, that is definitely a little bit of a surprise and a pretty, like I said, it's a really big bombshell at this point. Because I would have thought, like I said, if they were going to switch, it was going to be with Dodge or going to be with the Ram program. Because we all know Kaulig Racing is very likely going to be that team that's going to be going to Ram next year in Truck Series competition. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in regards to that and see if they do get some sort of hybrid system in the future. But as of now, it's just up in the air. The earliest they would switch would be a couple years down the road. Also, MotoGP program makes a ton of sense. We'll see what happens in the future if Honda does come into the sport. We'll see if Trackhouse Racing could align with Honda in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR Silly Season and doing a little bit of a NASCAR Silly Season roundup in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Now, the Daily Downforce, which is a parody account of the Daily Downforce, has put out some interesting rumors in regards to that. And they put out 5 posts on their Twitter page, 4 of them that were real and 1 that was not real. I think it's very clear the one that was not real was probably the Chris Wright and Joe Gibbs Racing rumors. Obviously, they were kind of teasing about Chris Wright going to Nice. So I think that's the fake rumor. They also mentioned the possibility of Dale Jr. going to Mazda MX-5 Cup. I think that's actually legitimate. There's been talk about Jr. wanting to make some more starts next year. So I think that is certainly a possibility. But there's 3 rumors that they brought up that I find to be very interesting. Let's begin by talking about the big one you click for, and that is Carson Kvapil. We have talked about this on the channel a lot. There's been a lot of rumors and a lot of speculation as well that Carson Kvapil has signed a development deal and a development contract with Team Penske. Despite this, it sounds very likely at the point, according to reports, that Carson Kvapil very likely will not be going over to Team Penske's Xfinity program or their Cup program at all in 2026, and is very likely expected they are going to be sticking around in 2026, that being Carson Kvapil with Junior Motorsports. He still will have that development contract according to reports for next year, but he won't be leaving the program. That makes a ton of sense to me because I didn't think that again, there was a chance that Team Penske was going to field a program in 2026 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, but Carson Kvapil's been very loyal to Junior Motorsports, and they're going to be loaning him out for the future. Now, I think down the road, Carson Kvapil may end up going to the NASCAR Cup Series with Team Penske, or perhaps the Wood Brothers, kind of very similar to what Josh Berry has done at least recently. I could see him being in the Penske organization. We're not sure how long Austin Cindric is going to be in that 2 car down the road, and Cindric has definitely struggled a little bit in that car as well. So I think Carson Kvapil definitely for sure is one to watch for sure at this point. I think he absolutely will be potentially a candidate to go to a Penske or a Ford team in the future, because he's not going to go to the Haas factory team at this point. So I would expect more than likely Carson Kvapil to stick around with Junior Motorsports. They really like him over there. He's had us all year. Not a fantastic year. He's been not as good as Sam Mayer was at times, but I think Kvapil's a very talented driver. Moving up, let's talk about Junior Motorsports in the 4th car. There has been some talk and conversations about Christian Eckes being a candidate to go over to Junior Motorsports, according to what they posted. Another account also talked about this as well. However, it sounds like Christian Eckes is going to be staying with the Kaulig Racing organization in 2026 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. His name had been linked to the 88 car for next year, because we know Connor Zilisch is moving up to the NASCAR Cup Series with Trackhouse Racing. Whether it's 88, the 87, or 99, that is still to be determined at this point right now. But Christian Eckes, we all know, has kind of struggled a little bit in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year. Hasn't had a lot of really good consistent pace and speed at times. And I think that Eckes, a lot of that is the organization itself. But I think that he is a lot better driver than what he has shown with the Kaulig Racing team so far this year. He has had a lot more pace and a lot more speed on the racetrack this year. They just haven't had the results to show for it, but he's also had some good runs with the team. I would have absolutely loved to see Christian Eckes be a candidate to go over there and do very, very well. But at the same token, at the same time, he's very loyal to Kaulig Racing. Now, speaking of Kaulig Racing at this point, they are expected to be at least a 2-car organization in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. They're very likely going to downsize that program from a 3-car team to 2-car team. My best guess is the number 11 is going to go away at the end of this year. I think that is a very big likely thing at this point. Some other things to note before we talk about Corey Heim. We all know that Hendrick Motorsports very likely will have a NASCAR Xfinity Series team on a full-time basis next year. Corey Day, I do expect to be full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year with that organization in team. Also, a lot of talk about Daniel Suarez. Talked about him quite a bit. We mentioned Christian Eckes a second ago. It is expected that very likely that we are going to see Suarez in that 88 car. That's a driver that I've heard from multiple different people, and I've heard his name linked many, many times to that 88 car. I know he's been rumored to go to Spire Motorsports next year, but I do not expect him to join that organization next season in Cup. I think despite the fact that Justin Haley is on the hot seat very heavily at this point right now, I do expect that you are going to see Suarez end up in the NASCAR Xfinity Series on a full-time basis next year, and I think that that is who will happen as Suarez ends up over at Junior Motorsports. Some other unknowns: Hendrick could still field the second part-time car, is my guess. Maybe they take the 5 back with our Motorsports no longer existing at this point in season operations. Maybe they get the 5 car, bring that program back. Also, I think there's going to be some changes over at Joe Gibbs Racing next year. Brent Cruz is very likely going to be full-time in Xfinity in the coming years and coming seasons. And I think some other drivers like Taylor Gray are going to remain in their positions. And I think there's some other drivers will be on the move as well in the Xfinity Series. But finally, let's talk about Corey Heim. Corey Heim, there's a lot of talk around him currently at the moment in his future. We do not expect Corey Heim to return to Tricon Garage in the 2026 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series season. According to reports, there's a lot of talk that they are trying to find him a full-time ride in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in the 2026 season with a team like Sam Hunt Racing. He will not go to Joe Gibbs Racing because Ty Gibbs and Joe Gibbs do not have a really good history at this point right now. So if he does move up next year to the Xfinity Series, it will be with a team like Sam Hunt Racing. He right now only has a part-time stint currently at the moment, and some people are wondering why he's not going to be back with Tricon. It is expected that Caden Honeycutt is going to take over the number 11 Craftsman Truck Series team in 2026. He, of course, has been expected to go to that program. I expect him to go over there, and that will mean Corey Heim needs to move up. I think Heim will end up over at Sam Hunt Racing. There was a rumor out there about him going over to Spire Motorsports next year. We do not expect him to go to Spire Motorsports in 2026. Yes, I think it'd be good for him to go over there, and maybe Chevrolet can buy him out. But at this moment right now, they're very, very high on him at Toyota. They don't want to lose him. And if they were to lose him to Chevrolet, that would be an absolute terrible decision on their part, and that would not make sense at this moment right now. So like I said, I expect Corey Heim to stay, actually move up to Xfinity competition, and join up with the Sam Hunt Racing team. I do not expect Corey Heim to go to Spire Motorsports in the Cup Series in 2026. I'm just not expecting that at this particular moment in point. There's some other moves that are expected to happen in the lower series coming up soon that'll probably get announced here in the not-so-distant future, among other big announcements that are coming very soon as well in NASCAR. So that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go more of that and comment your thoughts below on today's video. What thoughts about Carson Kvapil likely returning to junior motorsports next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what thoughts about Corey Heim not likely moving up to Spire Motorsports in Cup? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If there's any major news that breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow, we're going to have my 2026 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series playoff predictions. We're also going to be reacting to the schedule as well tomorrow morning when that gets released. Then on Wednesday, we'll have a NASCAR news video talk about the 2026 schedule as well. And we also will likely have the Xfinity Series race picks for Daytona. Thursday, Cup picks for Daytona for the Coke Zero Sugar 400 and the paint skin video as well. Then Friday, a NASCAR news video reactions, Cup qualifying. And then, of course, we will have the review for the Xfinity race. And then Saturday, we'll have the review for the Cup race and the starting lineup video. Then Sunday, we're going to have Xfinity silly season predictions. And then Tuesday will be playoff predictions for the Cup Series. We got content coming out. People like Haley Ding, Shane Gisberg, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bo Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Crease, Sam Mayer, Will Brown, Bach Feeney, Cam Waters, Jack Perkins, Cleveland Zafron, Dodge Ram, all the good stuff. We'll talk about it on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.